Hello, I'm just saying hello. It's 6:31. We're gonna start in a minute or two. I will introduce myself at that time too, but thanks for coming. We've got the doors open, people are coming in. And I'm happy to be here tonight on this. So we'll come back in about 1 minute. We'll get rolling. Okay, we're going to start. It's 6:32, and I really appreciate that people are here on time. So we've got about 30 attendees in the room right now, probably more coming. But I'm just going to introduce myself quickly to say I'm Jane Farrow, and I am leading on the community engagement work for 3 Park Home Avenue. This is our second information session, and the first being on July 18th. And we are going to have present some of the same information from before in case there's people that hadn't seen it yet, but try to keep that to a minimum and give you updates and more answers to questions. We'll go through how to ask questions, how to participate in as we go through the presentation. I just want to say hello, I'm Jane, I'm the facilitator, and I'm now going to hand it over to a person from the city of Toronto who is going to do a land acknowledgement, and her name is Zuna Khaled.
Thank you, Jane. Yes, my name is Zuna. I'm a program coordinator with Planning and Engagement Team at SSHA. We acknowledge the land we are on is a traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands.
Thank you very much, Zuna. Okay, next slide, we have some information about the accessibility of this session. If you have accessibility issues, you may well get better service by using the phone. There's better accommodation services available on the phone. And so what you see on screen is the numbers that you would dial if you were to use the phone. And basically, please dial 647-558-0588. And use a webinar ID that you see there and a passcode. If you need that information again, please stay on this webinar and put a note in the Q&A box, and we'll send you that information directly so you can use your phone. But if you're here and it's working, well, maybe you're fine on the webinar format. Next slide. We want to tell you that these meetings are recorded, and they are used, they're recorded on YouTube and posted after the meeting is over. So it's not being recorded live on YouTube, but it is recorded and posted on the City of Toronto's YouTube channel. And the link for it will be available on the Park Home Project webpage. So you'll be able to see the meeting or pass it to neighbors or colleagues who want to see the meetings. But this is also the reason why we would ask people to keep your personal information out of the proceedings. So try not to identify people by name or where you live, something like that, so that we don't have to scrub it for private and personal data. If you wish to discuss things of a private matter and you're not able to speak tonight at the meeting, please use the, again, project website and find our Gmail address there, which is 3parkhomeave@gmail.com. It's generally available, so please get in touch and we'll correspond on email. Next slide. Tonight you'll be hearing from the Councillor John Filion, Loretta Ramadan, who's the project director with the Capital Development Unit of SSHA, and Milton Barrera, who's the project director for Homelessness Initiatives and Prevention Services of SSHA. and Allison Felicia, who is a director with Transaction Services with Corporate Real Estate Management of the City of Toronto. And we also have a guest tonight, Dan Rutembesa, who is the Senior Director of Shelter and Housing for Sojourn House, which is a shelter provider that provides similar services in other areas of the city and may well be providing services here, but we have not got a confirmed contract yet. But Dan is able to talk about shelter operations and the work that they do at Sojourn House. So we're delighted to have him along. Next slide. And the agenda is pretty simple. We're going to have some opening remarks from the Councillor Filion, who will give you some updates on things that have been happening in City Council and other places. We're going to have a presentation deck on 3 Parkholme Avenue, how the operations are presumed or proposed to work there. And then we'll have at least 70, maybe 90 minutes of Q&A and feedback where your comments, questions, concerns can be asked. We'll get to as many as we can. Sometimes we aggregate them. General topic areas do sort of evolve and appear, areas that people are curious about or concerned. And just a quick closing and a wrap up and next steps. That's the agenda for today. Next, and back to Zuna for the African ancestral acknowledgement.
Hi, Jen. I'll be doing the African ancestral acknowledgement. Hi, everyone. My
I'm
name
so
is
sorry,
Ahmed.
Suhal Ahmed.
Yes, I'm the manager of planning engagement. So though I am not a person of African descent, I'm committed to continually acting in support of and in solidarity with Black communities seeking freedom and reparative justice in light of the history and ongoing legacy of slavery that continues to impact Black communities in Canada. As part of this commitment, I would also like to acknowledge that not all people came to these lands as migrants and settlers. Specifically, I wish to acknowledge those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly those brought to these lands as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. In support of the City of Toronto's ongoing efforts to confront anti-Black racism, I pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent.
Thank you very much, Suhal. And we now turn to Councillor John Filion, who is the local councillor in Willowdale, Ward 18, for some opening remarks and updates. Welcome, John.
Yes, thank you, Jane. Thank you, everybody who's come out to now the second meeting. So just a couple of updates. I'll try to address at the outset some of the main concerns that have come up both at the meeting last time and in emails I have received. So the first had to do with the speed of all this coming up. And I think, as I indicated at the last meeting, I agreed that everything was moving ahead a little bit too quickly to have proper conversations about things and get people's questions answered. So thankfully, the mayor agreed with that. And although he very much supports this project, agreed to create a special meeting on August 15th. So I would have something to defer the item that was at last week's council to. So the decision on the lease will be made by council now on August 15th. It will certainly be made that day because the next regular meeting of council is not until 2023, usually around the beginning of February. So certainly something needs to happen before then. So council will not defer it again. I just want to clarify that what's on the agenda, the same as what was on the agenda last week, is the terms of the lease only. You know, not it doesn't cover a lot of the issues that people have raised. That's all that's before council. Council, rightly or wrongly, delegated to staff the ability to choose sites for shelters of any kind, and also council some years ago designated any property in the city for use by a shelter. So the only thing before us is the terms of the lease. Um, excuse me, to address another concern, the BIA in particular, but some others have been concerned about the loss of a hotel in the community. The BIA has in particular been concerned about the loss of any business that might come from people staying in the hotel. The loss of the hotel itself isn't really something that can be, that I have a way of addressing, or the council has a way of addressing. The hotel operator, is, wanting to discontinue use as a hotel and lease the facility to the city for this purpose. So I'm not sure that anything can be done about that, but certainly the impact of any loss on business can be mitigated. Excuse me. And I'm trying to do that mainly through the provision of food. There will be, approximately 600 people living in the Novotel. They all need to have 3 meals a day. Most of that will be provided by staff of the Novotel preparing meals, but I am trying to develop a protocol for food being able to be brought in by local food providers, and also the residents of the Novotel, of the refugee center at the Novotel, being able to have some meals outside of the building, so that that will certainly create some business for local merchants. There's been a lot of concern about schools and what's the impact on the schools going to be, what's it going to do to class sizes and the organization of classrooms. It's a very valid concern, of course. There is some space in local schools, but not a large amount. We're still trying to quantify which schools have how much space with the 2 school boards. There may be other ways of doing this that don't have such an impact on the local schools, and I'm currently in discussions with both school trustees, Maria Rizzo and Alexander Brown, about that, and we will be engaging the staff from the school boards, as will the staff from Shelter Support and Housing, and don't have anything further to report on that now, but certainly will have before school starts, and hopefully we'll be able to come up with a model to greatly reduce any impact on local schools. And finally, the issue that I get, the question I get asked the most in emails, and came up multiple times at the last meeting, will the city switch this to a homeless shelter at some point? So I think where that concern originated was that the previous refugee center in the ward, 5800 Yonge Street, started out as a refugee center and then got switched to a homeless shelter. And people are saying, well, that happened there, could it happen here? The answer that I get from city staff is no, there is absolutely no intention to do that. This site is, extremely large for a homeless shelter. It's not a great location, and that wouldn't happen. I take them at their word on that. And it was really unique pandemic circumstances that created that switch at 5800. That is not how these things normally go. It is not a normal practice. What happened there was due to travel restrictions, mainly the number of refugees showing up at Canada's borders, dropped to a trickle. And at the same time that was happening, the city was having an even greater issue with homelessness, both in numbers and in having to create much greater distance in the shelters between the people staying in them so that they didn't give COVID to one another. So because of that, at the same time, the city didn't need space for refugees. It needed a lot more space for homeless shelters. We had people setting up encampments in parks and people sleeping in subway shelters. And basically 5,800 emptied out as a refugee center. So it made no sense to keep it empty when we had that kind of a crisis with housing the homeless. So that's how that happened. I do not foresee any situation that would duplicate those events. And even if it does, staff have given the assurance that that would not happen here. So those are the kind of the key updates. I'm sure some other issues will come up during the course of the evening.
That's great. Thank you very much, Councillor. Okay, next slide. Deals with accessibility on the Zoom platform. And I could actually go into this in detail because we'll do this more when we get to the Q&A. A lot of people are familiar with the platform, but if you're having troubles, we're available. The Q&A box is the most important thing I want to direct you to right away, that you can enter questions there right now that we will take and aggregate where there's common themes. So please put your questions in as soon as you want. We'll familiarize you with how to raise and unraise your hand so that you can ask a question or make a comment live as well. You won't be seen, but you can be heard. So with your own voice or through the chat box. Next slide. A code of conduct. This is a standard feature of City of Toronto meetings. We strive to make a very safe space for people that's respectful of neighbors and various opinions. Everyone deserves to be heard. But we're also looking for behaviors that are generally acceptable and without discriminatory comments, prejudicial, derogatory in any way. So I'll be making sure, of course, the space upholds this code of conduct. We had no issues in previous meetings. I don't anticipate that we will, but just so you know, there is a code of conduct. Next slide, please. We are now going to go to Milton Barrera. He's the project director with SSHA, Homelessness Initiatives and Prevention Services. Take it away, Milton. You've got a whole bunch of things to explain about how these services work in the city. So have at it.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jane. Good evening, everyone. I want to thank everyone for taking this time this evening to join us to hear more about 3 Park Home Avenue and the services and supports planned for the site. This evening, I'll walk you through a presentation that provides an overview of the current need for temporary accommodations for refugees, refugee claimants in Toronto, and the services that Shelter Support and Housing Administration, SSHA, provides. Next slide, please. The need for refugee accommodations. The city has seen a steady increase in refugees seeking temporary accommodations since September of 2021. Primarily driven by the border reopening and easing of international travel restrictions. In the first half of this year, an average of 55 new refugees per week have been accessing Toronto's shelter system. And currently we have 1,700 refugee clients in our emergency shelter system. Toronto continues to provide a safe haven for refugees and refugee claimants looking to build new lives for themselves and their families. The city continues to request immediate and urgent action from the federal and provincial governments to plan for the large-scale increase in refugee claimant arrivals to avoid a potential crisis. This includes intergovernmental strategy and funding. The city continues to call for more effective intergovernmental planning to mitigate the length of time refugee claimants utilize temporary shelters and to improve overall housing outcomes. Next slide, please. The need for refugee accommodations. Reasons why people seek refugee status in Canada vary. And our friends at Surgeon House will definitely be talking about this and providing examples. Individuals may have fled their home countries or were forced to flee due to armed conflicts, political unrest, or prosecution due to race, religion, or political opinion. Currently, Toronto's shelter system serves refugees from all over the world, including individuals from Africa, the Caribbean, South America, Europe, the Middle East, and Central and South Asia. What I'd like to highlight is that the city is currently working with local municipalities on a regional response plan to provide temporary accommodation to those fleeing from Ukraine. This proposed site, 3 Park Home Avenue, is not part of that response effort. Next slide, please. Shelterborne Housing Administration currently works with 5 different nonprofit organizations to provide support specifically to homeless refugees across 7 sites. These sites are presently supporting more than 1,100 refugees for both singles and families. Refugees are supported in various ways, such as through the immigration process to access income supports with settlement needs such as language, education, employment opportunities, and housing searches. In addition, SSHA has contracted several smaller refugee centers to support and rapidly house refugee claimants through shelter diversion. What shelter diversion means is that some of these individuals and families do not access the shelter system and goes directly into housing. SSHA also provides housing benefits to support our refugee service providers to quickly house refugee claimants. I'd like to highlight some of our housing outcomes. In 2021, of course, through the pandemic, we were able to house 442 individuals discharged to permanent housing. Currently in 2022, we're at 587 individuals who've been successfully housed into permanent housing. Next slide, please. A proposal is going to Toronto City Council next month to use 3 Park Home Avenue to meet the current need for temporary accommodations for refugees and refugee claimants. Also important to note, this proposal was revised as a result of the meeting in July to allow for more time for engagement. The proposed program at 3 Park Home will provide safe shelter as well as wraparound supports aimed at helping refugees and refugee claimants find and secure permanent housing and build connection within that community. The supports provided will be based on individual needs and may include help with the settlement process and case coordination with legal services, employment, and education support, and referrals to the healthcare centers and community centers. Recreation programs will be developed at the site to engage clients and youth. Funding for the 3 Park Home will be based on the federal government's commitment to reimburse the city for the cost it incurs in providing accommodations for the refugee sector in 2022.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Milton. Milton sticking around. Of course, he'll be here for the whole Q&A. So I see that questions are starting to arrive in the Q&A box directed specifically to Milton, for instance. So he'll be back to answer questions, but we're going to keep going and hear from Loretta Ramadan about how the sites for shelters are chosen and processed. It's something she works on for the City of Toronto. Hello, Loretta.
Hi, thank you for joining us this evening. Can I get the next slide, please? A common community question we are asked is about how the city makes decisions about the sites that are selected for a new shelter, and I would like to spend a few minutes sharing information that I hope is helpful. Shelters are one of many municipal services that the city provides, like daycares, libraries, and community centers. It is important that shelters are available in neighborhoods across Toronto. When searching for a new shelter location, city staff will seek buildings that are available, affordable, of a suitable size, and close to transit and services. Prior to the pandemic, SSHA also operated a number of hotel locations to expand and contract available space quickly in response to shelter demand. These sites were primarily serving families and refugees, but now the majority are a part of the COVID-19 response. Hotel sites were previously selected through a request for proposal process to support this initiative. As authorized by City of Toronto bylaws, city staff have the delegated authority to site new shelters in locations that meet zoning requirements before engaging with the community. City staff work closely with the community as part of the engagement process to ensure the site is successful in the community. Next slide. Due to the urgency of this search, we conducted a search for a location that was more or less turnkey ready for operations with minimal retrofits required, that would adequately allow us to meet physical distancing guidelines, was available right away, and was close to transit as well as being accessible. Hotels were considered optimal solutions as they provided the furniture, physical distancing, and shelter residents in their own rooms with their own bathrooms. And the hotel is able to provide services such as cleaning and catering as required. All potential properties identified for use were assessed by an interdivisional team in consideration of program needs. Next slide. Three Park Home, which operates as the Novotel Toronto North York, is a 20-story hotel located at Yonge and Park Home Avenue. It has 260 guest rooms spread through floors 4th through 19th. Floors 1 to 3 of the building contain a number of common spaces, including a restaurant, ballrooms, and conference rooms. This will provide space to provide programming to residents. These floors also contain offices that can be used by site staff. The site is conveniently located beside the North York Centre Station. The neighborhood contains a number of amenities as well for residents, including the North York Central Library, the Douglas Snow Aquatic Center, the Meridian Arts Center, with whom Councillor Fillion is working closely with to provide programming for residents, parks and green spaces, public transportation, and Mel Lastman Square.
Thank you very much, Loretta. Again, Loretta will be around to answer questions and concerns. And but next up is Allison Folisea. She's the Director of Transaction Services at Corporate Real Estate Management at the City of Toronto, who will go over briefly some details of the lease. And she will be around to answer questions too, but we want to avoid kind of, giving you exactly the same information as before. So she's here for questions, but Allison, could you tell us in broad strokes how the lease negotiation is going, and give us an overview of that, please?
Great, thanks, Jane. We could go on to the next slide. I'd like to echo my colleagues' thanks for joining this evening. It is so valuable for us to be able to engage and provide more information on this opportunity. So we have, I think much of this information has been provided in the past, but I will reiterate some of the highlights. Some of the key components is that the city is leasing the hotel, the entirety of the hotel, for 5 years, commencing in September. We do believe we are planning for a ramp up of occupation within the site, but ultimately, by beginning of November, we anticipate being at full occupancy for the site for the remainder of the 5 years. As Loretta highlighted, the property contains 260 hotel rooms. And I think it's also been mentioned that there are also meeting rooms and other spaces within the site to support some of the programming initiatives that will take place. The landlord will continue to operate the site, including the provision of maintenance, housekeeping, and general building operations. And the city will be engaging with an operator to facilitate the programming component. Hotel staff will be available 24 hours a day on site. We are continuing to have discussions internally around the provision of security. The city is responsible under the lease for the provision of security, and we're working closely with the security provider for the larger complex to ensure that there is a seamless provision of security and integration of this program into the larger complex. I would flag just quickly that, as Councillor Fillion mentioned, catering is a huge component of both the contract with the hotel operator, but also an opportunity to support the integration of the site into the community. The catering contract will provide the majority of the meals. It does include the opportunity to provide one meal a week from an external catering source, and we will work with the operator once onboarded on how to implement that strategy to encourage the integration of the larger business community within the site. Happy to take any questions. I know this is a large component of many of the community's questions. Thanks, Jane.
Great. Thank you, Allison. You'll be sticking around for sure. Okay, and we're going to go back to Milton Barrera now. He previously had provided an overview of refugee services, but he's going to drill down and get a little bit more specific about operations at 3 Park Home Avenue. Milton?
Yeah,
over
no,
to you.
thanks, Jane. And I realize I went straight into conversation, but I want to just quickly introduce myself. Milton Barrera, Project Director with Homelessness Initiatives and Prevention Services. What that means is that I oversee the operations of the shelter system, which includes our purchase of service, also known as our community partners, to deliver high quality services to those in need. So program overview. Sorry, just losing my place here. The refugee shelter program at 3 Park Home will consist of 260 fully furnished and self-contained units. As Councillor Phil-Leon said earlier, we're looking at approximately 600 to 700 refugees and their families being accommodated there. The units will provide much needed safe space for individuals and families to settle and begin their lives in Canada. We typically use approximately 10% of those rooms for programming and staff office use. In addition, we're looking at using 50 rooms for singles, double occupancy, with the remaining rooms to support refugee families. Clients will begin transitioning to the site potentially in early September with 50 rooms, and we'll move forward with a slow ramp up on the site on a weekly basis. Our ramp up schedule includes approximately 26 rooms per week until we complete filling up all the rooms, potentially at the end of October. As noted, we're in conversations with a potential site operator, and once selected, we'll work with them to finalize a site operation plan. Next slide, please. Dedicated staff team will work with individuals and families, focusing on making them feel welcome and at home in Toronto. Park Home will provide emergency shelter and support services for refugee singles and families that include, but of course not limited to, 24-hour staffing support, meal programs serving high quality food, and as Councillor Phil-Leon said, looking at also our community vendors to provide meals, supportive counseling for all phases of the settlement process, including the refugee determination and landing process, assisting in securing appropriate and permanent housing, referrals to culturally appropriate community supports, case coordination with legal services, assistance assessing employment and educational programs, including employment training and post-secondary programs. Next slide, please. Support services provided. The site will include a number of support services, including recreational and social activities and programming to engage clients, children, and youth, on-site primary care health supports, orientation sessions and monthly tenant meetings, coordination with external service providers for individual needs, community outreach, follow-up support after the client leaves the shelter to ensure that clients are successful in their housing. Also to note, Shelter Support and Housing Administration, along with Councillor Phil-Leon's office, have been in conversation with Toronto District School Board and the Toronto Catholic District School Board. We've confirmed with Toronto District School Board, families with school-age children can register and support those families. We are currently finalizing plans with the Toronto Catholic District School Board. Next slide, please. SHA will be working collaboratively with various city divisions, community agencies, and facilities to maximize opportunities to support the needs of new residents of 3 Park Home. Such services include working with our agencies, Toronto Public Library, Toronto Parks and Recreation, such as Douglas Snow Aquatic Center, TO Live at the Meridian Arts Center, North York Arts, and we're also seeking the appropriate funding to ensure that this can be provided. SSHA will be working collaboratively with community organizations such as Willowdale Interfaith Council to meet the emotional and spiritual needs of the residents of Three Park Home. SSHA will provide regular briefings to and consultations with the local councillor on the operations of Three Park Home, including opportunities for improvement and to address any issues that may arise. SSHA will work with selected program operator and local businesses to ensure that we can procure locally any catering opportunities.
Great. So Milton, can I just hold you there? There's one question that popped up quickly in the Q&A that would just be, we could get out of the way really efficiently. Just a little clarification on the numbers. When you say there are 600 to 700 refugees and refugee claimants, is that, does that include children? Is that 600 individuals? Can you just break that number down a little bit?
Yeah, for sure, definitely. So what we see is typically families have about 3 children per family, so that would include children. So of the 600 to 700, it's safe to say that half would be children.
Okay, great. So it's a total number of people.
That's correct. Total,
Some
yes,
individuals,
total
some
number of
families.
people.
Okay, right. Okay, great. Super. I'm glad we got that clarified. Great question. Thank you, Stephen. And on to, we're going to introduce you now to Dan Rutembesa. He's the Senior Director of Shelter and Housing for Sojourn House. And Sojourn House is an service provider operating in Toronto that does refugee service provisioning in shelter settings and welcome house settings. So Dan, could you turn on your camera and say hello and give us some just basic overviews of what Sojourn House is? They are in conversation with the city at this time about potentially being the operator in this area, but nothing is signed and sealed. So we're going to keep the discussion kind of high level still, but we were really keen to have people from the community meet someone from Sojourn House and learn a little bit about their work. Dan.
Thank you very much. I just want to thank the City of Toronto and everybody in attendance for allowing us this chance to talk about services that Sojourn House has been providing to refugees, services and support for refugees and refugee claimants for the last 35 years. So currently we do run 2 shelters. Let me just go first to the mission statement that we are guided by to provide a safe place and create an inclusive environment where refugees are provided and where refugees are supported and empowered to pursue a life in Canada. And our vision is a safe world and a better future for all refugees. So Sojourn House provides emergency shelter and transitional housing services to newly arrived refugees coming from all parts of the world. We provide a safe place and an inclusive environment to people who have had a refugee experience. We are dedicated to providing the best possible settlement services and programs that help residents transition and integrate into the community. And right now, we do offer a single emergency shelter in our location at 101 Ontario Street. We have, as well as transitional housing. We also have a family shelter, which we have been operating for the last 4.5 years at 165 Grange. We do provide youth who are separated between the age of 16 and 24, separated youth. We do provide them a program called Skills for Life. And currently we are working with 24 youth who are staying in our transitional housing. We do provide outreach for our clients who move into the community and housing stabilization should our clients who have moved out of the community, should they have issues, they come back to us. We also have on-site health clinic and we provide food services for our programs. and I'll be around for any questions.
Fabulous. Thank you. Really appreciate that. All right. And just before we do get to the Q&A, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the community engagement program that we are rolling out as part of this project. I have been brought on to sort of ramp up in this early phase. Eventually, the service provider will be doing the community engagement work. That might be 6 months from now, or it might be 4 months, but we're just ramping up with these public meetings. On the right, you see a list of actions currently underway. I'd like to draw your attention to the last item there, which is a community liaison committee. In addition to these meetings and stakeholder outreach and briefings, newsletter, and updating the website, posting meeting summaries, things like that, answering the Gmail account, as you see on the bottom left, there's the address. There's something called the Community Liaison Committee that is available here in the community if there is a desire or appetite to establish one. A CLC, as we call it, is composed of maybe 6 to 12 community members who represent organizations. So there would be seats there for the BIA, residents associations, maybe condo associations, service providers, church, faith groups, organizations that have a constituency that they can feed information back to and bring information to the shelter service and engagement process. What happens in the cases where these have been established elsewhere in Toronto, they're not always part of a shelter service, but if the community wants one, we can certainly roll one out. What happens is you apply to be on the CLC, a very simple application process, just asking some basic questions, and what organizations you would represent, small or large, and a selection process selects the people putting forward. There's also provisions for having alternates. If there's if there's a couple people from an organization that want to join, they can alternate back and forth. And we meet about once a month virtually to sort of air and triage concerns, questions, requests for action, decisions, information, and offer feedbacks to the CLC members to take back to their members through their communication vehicles, newsletters, briefings, Facebook pages, and so on. So it's a back and forth. I mean, there's answering of questions, getting answers, getting decisions made, communication, but there's also the work of helping integrate the service into the community, which, so offers of support, volunteering, connecting with people using the service. That's also something the CLC, like welcome baskets, sometimes schools write welcome letters elsewhere with shelter services to introduce them and welcome people to the community. So that's a CLC. You could indicate if you're interested in that by just generally getting in touch with us at the Parkholme Avenue Gmail address. If this is something of interest, we will absolutely get rolling on it. The BIA has expressed their interest in exploring this further at this time, which is a big indicator of interest. And so we wait to see if that's something people want to pursue. So that's it for community engagement. I'll be around. I'm doing my best to get to the Gmail. And as we get your requests for information, provide you with information as it becomes available. There's a lot of answers that aren't known, but there are, slowly we are getting more information, and that's part of what we're doing here at this meeting. And so with that, I think it's time to switch to the Q&A period and just give you a very quick rundown on how to ask a question, which already we have 32 questions in the Q&A, which is wonderful. Currently, we have about 55 attendees, and we have some people with hands up. And so it's great. So basically how to do this, which is to raise your hand. People are figuring out how to do that, how to use the Q&A box. And once I identify you by possibly the last 3 digits of your phone number, for instance, if you're on the phone, or just your first name, you can your microphone will be turned on by our tech, Andrea, and you'll ask your question or comment, and away we go. So actually, on that note, Andrea, would you be willing to turn the floor over to Benjamin? Let's go with Benjamin, who has their hand up, And if you can unmute Benjamin, they can ask their question or make their comment right away. Benjamin, are you there?
Yeah.
Yep. All right. So what's your comment or question? And try to not, identify yourselves overly or where you live and things like that for the recording.
I just have come back from someone just now.
It's a question.
How the three of the baseball and soccer this year baseball field? This is a baseball field and this is a soccer field. Open back today.
Okay. Benjamin, I'm not able to understand the question. If you could, send it into the Q&A box, maybe we're having some trouble technically. So let's go to Mark. Mark, who's also on the with their hand up. Mark, you have the floor. Can you speak and be heard?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. You're loud and clear. Good.
Okay, I'm getting a huge amount of feedback, so I'm not quite sure how well you'll hear me. Anyway.
You sound great. It sounds perfectly clear.
Oh, good. Okay, so the thing I'm concerned about is less about the building and the lease and all that stuff, but more about the wraparound services. Because for a program of this size, 6 weeks is basically tomorrow to September the 6th. So I would expect for a program of this size, everyone who's providing the wraparound services listed on slides 23, 24, 25 would be named and ramping up right now. And there's really been no information about that. And what gives me even more cause for concern is someone mentioned that while we're looking at the Joshua organization to provide these services, but nothing's been signed yet. Like, it's tomorrow you got to get this done by. So what can you do to give us some comfort that when we send these people in, they're going to be getting the services they need to move on? Otherwise, you're just creating a warehouse.
Great. Excellent question, Jason. Fabulous. I can throw that to a couple people, and we're seeing questions of that nature in the chat as well. Basically, that's a pretty tight timeline. How does the City of Toronto expect to ramp up that quickly and provide the services it wants to, and avoid having the hotel become a warehouse, as you say? Who would like to take that? Would that be to Milton or maybe, maybe Milton? Is that the right person that should take this one, Milton? How are you going to provide those stories, those services so quickly? The ramp up is quite ambitious.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm just trying to go on video, but it's saying your video has.
Right. We
Okay,
can
there we
hear
go.
you. So
There we go.
there you go.
Yeah, no.
You might as well put your video on because you're probably going to be a popular guy tonight, Milton.
Yeah, that's fine. So one of the things that we're doing is we're seeking a refugee specific provider, and what that means is that the skill sets are already built within that provider. So we know that the size of this program is large scale. So we're working with the potential selected provider to look at how we can upscale their services with add-on supports from community agencies and other refugee-specific serving agencies to ensure that there is no service disruption and that we are successful in housing individuals. So that's what I can reassure you with. I would also say that pretty sure Dan can kind of speak on the volume of refugees they deal with and the success they've had. We're using we hope to use a very reputable agency that has years and years of experience working with newcomers.
Okay.
Just one thing, sorry, Jane. Just the last thing I would note is that we also have a ramp-up schedule, right? So it's as much as we're in activating the site, we recognize that we wouldn't have 600 to 700 people in a few days. We would have a ramp up schedule, and we were looking at about a 2-month ramp up schedule.
I think that's very helpful information for that. Thank you, Milton. Dan, you're free to add something to that, but we have a lot of questions to get to. But Dan, if there's anything you want to add, we're all ears, or we can keep rolling. It is ambitious, but okay, it's a ramp up. It's a slow
I'll
ramp
add something, Jane. Just I will be pleasantly surprised if everything is ready to go on September the 6th. So it's a really, really good question, and if we have to delay the start till everything's ready, then that's what we should do. And I don't know that that's the case yet, but certainly, hopefully, we'll be involved in those discussions. I completely agree with the question that we have to make sure we do this, really well right from day one.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm going to take a question from the Q&A now that was typed in, and it concerns safety in the neighborhood. There are people asking, how safety and security works. There was mention at one point about the city providing an overall plan for security, even maybe hiring the security firm, and also that this maybe could be folded into a larger answer. Just generally, people are asking, how will our neighborhood remain safe? I think there's some concerns that a refugee shelter could represent a risk and a crime, a source of crime and undesirable activity. There's even the sort of specific request or comment or request for assurance that an ambulance, a fire truck, and a police car will be parked permanently in front of the shelter, in front of the hotel. So who is best suited to really give us an overall kind of perspective on how security and safety and community concerns are addressed in this way? Is this Milton? Is it Loretta?
Yeah, I can start. So,
Okay,
in our typical shelters, non-refugee programs, we typically have security guards as part of the program. Keeping in mind that this is a refugee-specific program, we have to be mindful that many of those people seeking services do come from countries where they have trauma based on law enforcement officials. So we really work with the agency to ensure that any safety issues that do arise are dealt with. And again, I really appreciate that Dan is here from Surgeon House, because again, this is real life experience that he can speak on the safety issues that do arise at his refugee programs. But in a nutshell, we would work with the operator and determine how the safety plan would look for that specific site. And it is case by case. I don't want to say that automatically we would put security guards in place, but it is, like I said, case by case.
Could you, Milton, address whether it's feasible to have an ambulance, a police car, and a fire truck permanently stationed in front of the hotel? If there would be a need for it or feasible? Is that a Milton or anyone else who could speak to that? That's a question out there.
Yeah, so I mean, we've been asked about this on other sites as well. Again, our emergency shelter sites, whether or not we can work with Toronto Fire, Toronto Paramedics, and Toronto Police to just station certain units, community units at the site. The reality is that it's a collaboration, right? So we do meet with Toronto Police, Toronto Paramedics, and Toronto Fire to get feedback from them and to look at how we can approach situations that do require emergency services to the location. I think to say that we would look at instituting a measure like that at this point in time would be too premature, just because it's the population. I think the key piece here is the population that will be served.
Thank you.
Just to add a bit more to that, we will obviously be listening to community feedback to see if there are safety concerns to address. And we don't want to be dismissive of anybody's safety concerns. I recognize there have been real challenges with the experiences of addiction, mental health, especially with those experiencing street homelessness, and how they may be impacting communities across the city of Toronto. And the city of Toronto has taken multiple different actions to try to address those concerns across all of our shelter sites and in the broader community. And I do recognize there are a lot of issues that community members are concerned about. But for this particular site, it is a refugee site, and we intend to keep it as a refugee site. We do not have many of these similar concerns at the refugee sites as we face at some of our other sites. So we don't want to preemptively implement services that will make people concerned about issues that may not be present at that site. We want to work with the community and work with the operator to make a plan that fits this particular community and this particular service at this site.
Jane, I'm just going to push back a little bit against the question. And, you know, I know we try to treat all questions as legitimate, but I'm just concerned that the legitimacy given to that question may create the impression that the person who is asking it has, you know, any reason to, you know, think that we should be putting putting police, fire and ambulance outside the building, because from all of the refugee housing providers I have spoken to, and I've spoken to 3 or 4 this week, there is no reason whatsoever to think that. And again, anybody who is conflating crime with shelters, number one, should call 32 Division, and they will set people straight on that. And people conflating homeless shelters and refugee housing are also doing a major disservice to people just by really spreading misinformation, which then causes people to be fearful when there is no basis for that. So, you know, let's try to have everybody try to be reasonable on this stuff.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to go to another live question. Andrew, if we can unmute Sogol. They have the floor and can make their comment. If they're able to speak now, we can hear you, I believe. Sogol? Talking is permitted. Okay, they may be busy. We'll come back to them. Let's go to the person on the phone that has the number 469 are the last 3 digits. Talking is permitted, 469. You have the floor.
Hello, it's Mark again.
Okay, well, Mark, you have, if you're back again, I'd like to kind of rotate around to new voices, but if you have something really quick to say, but there are many people waiting.
I got it. I do one quick thing. I consulted with a few teacher colleagues, and with the information we got last week that the average stay is 3 months, cycling children through the school system for 3-month stints is going to be highly unproductive, both for the school system and the children. So Councillor Fillion suggested that some alternatives are being investigated, but I think you really need to look closely at what's the best way to make the use of the time that the children are likely to be in an educational window, if you want to think of it that way, and just having them drop into a classroom for 3 months just will not get them anywhere. So I'd like to get some guidance on what perhaps instead could be done as an on-site program for education that would appropriately fill, say, an average of 3 months, and then prepare a child for actually engaging the education system on an ongoing basis when they're placed.
Okay, thank you.
Mark, I just
Mark,
want to, just want to say I have, as I said at the outset, I've had several conversations already with people about how best to do the educational component. Not that it is my responsibility or even the cities, it is the school boards, but we're having a little bit of difficulty engaging people because of summer holidays and whatnot, but we'll be looking for the best solution, both for the children at the Novotel themselves and that works best for the schools. So that's all I can tell you at this point, but I think people are open to looking at different models, and when we land somewhere, we'll be sure to let you know.
I'd like to also throw that question to Dan, if I may, because you are on the ground providing these services and dealing with children arriving and trying to get them into schools. Dan, can you turn your camera on and tell us how it works on the ground when someone's just arriving, then maybe only have 2 or 3 months? Is it disruptive? What's the best way to do this, and how do you do it?
So currently, what we, the shelter we have at 165 Grange, our children go to Ryerson Primary and others go to the high school, Central Tech. On average, given what's happening with the immigration process, actually the average will be probably 6 months because of what the backlog in the immigration process. However, the schools that we have been working with are very prepared to work with our children and have been providing services to the children without any much disruption to the children in the school or the children, our children from the shelter. And we've been there for 4.5 years.
Terrific. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to draw another couple of comments from the Q&A, mindful that we have received 48 comments, many of which are not questions or concerns. In fact, some of them are extremely are effectively problematic in their tone and what they're implying. Now, the Q&A is something that we can only see in the back end, but I do want to mention that the code of conduct that I brought up, that we welcome interaction and discourse and discussion and commentary, and this is the essence of what public meeting is. But there's some threatening comments that are very kind of ugly, so we're not going to honor any of that, and we ask you to engage with your open mind in this process. That said, there are many very good questions here, so I'm going to sort of get at a couple about the number of refugees processed and housed in Toronto. People are wondering, why does Toronto take so many? And are Ukrainian refugees going to be part of the service provided there? And again, on the wraparound supports question, will interpreters be provided? Will there be mental health, psychology, in addition to physical doctors and medical assistants? Milton, or can you field that one? Why so many refugees in Toronto? And why are there Ukrainians coming to this site?
Yeah, no, definitely. I can kickstart that, and then I feel like Dan and I are a tag team. So with no surprise, Toronto is well known, especially Canada and the city of Toronto. So, we see people coming through Pearson Airport, and when people arrive to Pearson Airport, they often go to Toronto as their destination location. We also have crossings coming from Lacal, southeastern part of Quebec, people arriving to the US and then realizing that it may not be a good fit for them, and then heading over to Quebec, crossing over, and then relocating from Lacal to Toronto. So, we are the hub. we are a city that's very inclusive and diverse, and that's what attracts people to come to Toronto. In regards to, and I'm sure Dan can speak about more reasons as to why Toronto is such a popular end destination for many. What I can say about the site is the site will not be for Ukrainian arrivals. Nicole Williams, who's also here, is one of our managers who's actually working with the Greater Toronto Housing Authority response for Ukrainian arrivals. In short, there's a response with other municipalities and regions that are supporting Ukrainian arrivals. So there's a separate response for that.
Okay, great. Let us go to Dan and ask Dan about how refugees accessing his services at Sojourn House access medical and psychological help. How does that work? What do they get that way?
So we do have in-service clinic that is called Crossroad Clinic, which is in collaboration, which is specifically focused on providing services for refugees. It is in collaboration with Women's College. So we have a doctor that comes in here twice a week and a nurse practitioner. So our clients, upon intake, they are also registered to see the medical clinic, so that initially they are introduced to the medical services within the country. Those who don't speak English or who don't speak French, we have services that are provided through multilingual interpreter services that we do have people who come either on site or virtually can do interpretation. So the languages are taken care of as well as their medical needs.
Great, thank you.
Jane, the other piece I would just like to add is that what we're seeing more now than previous years is that although newcomers may arrive to Toronto, we're seeing regional housing, which means that people aren't necessarily staying in Toronto, they're moving to the outer areas of Ontario, such as Windsor, London, North Bay, where housing is affordable or wait lists are much shorter. So we are seeing that although people arrive to Toronto, when they're housed, they're leaving Toronto to these other municipalities.
Okay. There's a really good question in here that we had at the past meeting too, but this is not going to go away because it's a very legitimate concern of people that have trouble accessing services, recreation services in particular in Toronto. So someone in the Q&A is asking, how will the presence of, more residents in the area, the shelter residents and their children affect the access that neighbors have to the facilities, like quite specifically the Douglas Aquatic Center. Of course, swim programs are notoriously difficult for Torontonians to access and register for. So, they just want to know, like, how is that going to affect their ability to access these services, which is already limited already? Could I get, I'm sorry, Milton, but I do think that these are the sorts of questions that people really want answers to. If you can keep your camera on, we will get you to respond. That's a big one. Access to registration programs in community centers. How will this service affect that, and how could it be mitigated if there's an impact?
Yeah, no, definitely. That's the last thing we want to have is a negative impact to the community. So we actively engage with Parks and Recreation divisions and other divisions such as Children's Services or any other division that we know, Toronto Employment Social Services, Toronto Library Services, other divisions or other services that the city provides that we know newcomers such as refugees will be accessing. I would actually turn over to Sohal or Loretta, who actually do the engagement with other divisions when it comes to community engagement and stakeholder engagement.
Loretta, Sohal. Loretta and Sohal, can you address this question of capacity for community facilities and how it may be impacted by the arrival of more residents.
Did you want to go, Suhal?
Sure. I think we do, where possible, try to bring in as many services within the site. We want to work with those existing community partners to open services and additional programs specifically for this refugee site. I know Councilor Fillion has been connecting with a lot of local stakeholders to see where there are avenues to bring in programming to the site. We are also looking to partner with our colleagues in Parks, Forest, and Recreation and other individuals to have refugee-specific programs within those existing facilities nearby. We recognize that we may need to utilize services in the community, but we are happy to work with our partners to ensure that there are still spaces for the existing community, and whatever we are doing, we are providing, we're also building capacity in the neighborhood to meet the needs of this increasing population. But again, that involves a lot of partnerships, a lot of conversations. So if we're happy to continue to talk with the community, understand where we may have missed some community groups or organizations where we should be connecting with, and we will connect with those organizations.
Thank you.
So I'll take a stab at that as well, Jane. Just as has been said, we'll look at what services are best provided on site, and we will look at is there a possibility of expanding capacity anywhere, as far as being concerned that people who are here for a short time are going to get in on the registration for swim classes at Douglas Snow. They would have to be terribly skilled to do that, since if most people who live in the community have a hard time accessing those programs. So it's going to be a bit of a challenge, but we run into this all the time, perhaps on a smaller scale, but the population in Willowdale increases greatly every year as a result of new condos. So a new condo wouldn't typically have this many kids, but we do have new construction going on all the time, and more population in the area, and are continually grappling with how do we keep up with the increased population. So it's not an entirely new issue to confront.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. There's a number of questions I want to get to next about the hotel and why it was chosen, why it has to be 5 years, that sort of thing. So please know that, Allison, I'm coming to you in a moment for the questions around that. But there's another question in the chat box I want to get to first, which is someone asking, as a resident in the area, they want to know how they can help this service integrate into the community, and they wonder if there are specific things that people can do to mobilize and prepare, say, people for winter, things like that. And I think I'd like to throw that over to Dan, because he has been in the front lines and he probably knows what really is helpful. Is it about baked goods or snowsuits, Dan? How can a community support the services you offer?
So there are so many ways of supporting the services we offer. For example, we do have teachers providing homework club for our kids on site. But in winter, yes, so there are a lot of, also many of our youth take programs in the school. So we do get permits and work with local schools and do a lot of programming at the schools too. So we do have also volunteer department where people we put out our needs and the community can fulfill those needs. As far as clothing is concerned, we do get clothing dropped by from the community. So they give us a call and we organize and sort it out and provide those services to our clients.
That's great. Dan, just staying there, if your service, the Sojourn House, was to get the contract to provide services at 3 Park Home, what would be the way that you would be able to reach out to the community to communicate with them what your needs are? Like how, if this is going to happen, how can people expect to be communicated with, and, you know, those sorts of needs and volunteer jobs be advertised or promoted? Like, how does the community know what they can do?
Normally, most of our clients actually go to the faith communities where they belong, and they talk, it's a word of mouth. But also now we intend to hire, if we are the agency that is given the opportunity, we intend to hire a community agent, a community liaison person to do community mapping and go to the communities and introduce our services and where we are and what we need, so that we can match the needs of the community with the needs of our clients.
Great. Okay. Well, the faith communities have already come forward, I believe. So that's great. That's good connective tissue. Okay. Let's get Allison on the screen, because we have a few rapid fire questions about the lease and Novotel and relationships between the city and negotiations. So Allison, are you on camera yet?
Yeah, Jane, I'm
Okay,
here.
good.
I'm here.
Okay.
And I've also been taking notes, and so I may try to cover a variety
Okay.
of lease questions. So if I miss
Right.
anything, let me know.
All right, so
Um,
I'm gonna ask a few, take a few more
Okay.
notes. Okay. Why is the
Ready.
contract 5 years? Why isn't it shorter? Why did the Novotel want to enter into this relationship? If you have insights on that. Should the city be in the business of buying a hotel and retrofitting it as opposed to leasing it? Can the hotel continue to operate as a hotel until it's full with other clients? Is there any world where there could be a half and half sort of arrangement? So if I've got those written down in case you
Yeah.
forget any, it's a lot, but go for it.
Those are all the questions that I had noted, Jane. Thanks. So maybe first, when did Novotel first approach the city? We issued a request for a request for expressions of interest in early 2021, and it closed in March of 2021, and that's when Novotel had first indicated an interest in partnering with the city as part of a shelter or larger scale program. At the time, the site was not conducive for the needs that the city wanted, but at this time it does meet the needs the city has. So they have been interested in partnering with the city for a significant period of time. In terms of the ramp up, we understand that Novotel anticipates continuing to provide services to the broader community during that ramp up period. But ultimately it is up to them in terms of how they run their business. We know that as we ramp up, we are only booking a portion of the hotel rooms, and it is a business decision as to what Novotel decides on from an operational perspective. Another question I had seen was, will the full details of the lease be made public, and how did we ensure that we're doing the deal on market? By way of city statute, we're obligated to transact at market value. And so we spend a lot of time working with both internal and external appraisers on the sort of the valuation behind the real estate transactions that we do. We, in this instance, had a significant amount of market testing done, given the fact that we had gone to market with a request of expression of interest, as well are in sort of regular negotiations of value with respect to some of our other hotel contracts. So we feel very confident that this is at market or a below market deal from our perspective. We think that this represents a good financial deal. In terms of making public the lease components, The key terms are part of the council report that had gone forward last week and will again come forward in August. And that's probably the best place to find out the sort of key terms that that will be made public. Beyond that, we don't typically release our actual leasing documents. The final question, and we spent a huge amount of time thinking about this, and many people in the community know that we have recently acquired hotels to transition them into affordable housing. It is something that we are constantly looking at. We know that we get federal funding to be able to support those initiatives. At this time, we don't anticipate proceeding in that way, but we do have the opportunity to continue to evaluate this site for that purpose.
Thanks.
Jane, did I cover it
Allison,
all?
You did, very good, and clear answers. I love it, but I'm gonna drill down on one little detail, another little, just to tie off this subject area with a couple other people. They're sort of not sure, why would the Novotel do this? Like whether what kind of insight or are they able to glean? And they may not, because it might be just, you're saying it's business, it's Novotel, they came forward. But what people are curious, were they not getting enough business? There's a lot of concern about the going away, the removal of hotel rooms for rent and meeting spaces in the community. So anything you can shed light on what Novatel's motivations would be are helpful, if you can at all. But just people are certainly wondering, why did they do that?
Yeah, Jane, I can't speak to what the motivations Novotel has in partnering with the city on this. I know informally in discussions with other hotel partners, there's a variety of incentives that they feel in terms of this is a good way of supporting their business needs. But in terms of exactly why they came forward, I can't speak to that.
Well, thank you for trying. Okay. Andrea, we're going to go to another person with their hand up, and you can unmute Raquel. It would be great if we can hear Raquel asking their question. They may not be there. How about Viola?
Hi, hello.
Oh,
hello?
you are, Raquel. There you go. Yep,
Yes.
I can hear you.
Hi, I appreciate Councillor Fillion's comments earlier about conflating a refugee shelter with a homeless shelter and the disservice that does to this project. But I do know that many people in the community are concerned. There's a 5-year lease here, and there was a site closer to Finch Avenue on Yonge Street that did start out as a refugee shelter and was converted by the city to a homeless shelter. So I was just wondering if the city could speak to what are the factors that would lead to a conversion of a program like this into a homeless shelter, and what are the reasons why that might happen or won't happen in this particular situation that would be different from the site a little bit further north?
A very sharp, pointy question, Raquel. Very good. It's exactly what a lot of people want to know. There's sort of some assurances that it's not going to happen, but you really want to know what are the decision-making factors. Allison, can I bring you back for that? Is that something you can speak to?
I can't speak to that, but I think Loretta probably can. She would be the best one.
Yeah,
Okay.
I can start, and Milton may choose to add to this. But to that site, the individual was speaking about the reason why that conversion actually happened was because of COVID. We were in the midst of the pandemic. The borders were closed. The amount of refugees in our shelter system had significantly decreased, and we were looking for spaces to physically distance. So that was why that particular site was converted. We feel it's unlikely a similar situation will happen over the course of the next 5 years. I mean, pre-pandemic, we were using hotels to service families and refugees, and we had been doing that for many years specifically. I think it's a low probability that it would happen. Milton, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I mean, Laura, that's bang on. I mean, the pandemic is something that occurred, and we had to respond quickly. And as such, the number of refugees coming to Canada as a whole just decreased drastically. Our intentions is actually to keep this as a refugee service site, and we're actually looking at bringing on more sites, as we expect that the increase of refugees coming to Canada will increase as the border restrictions soften and flow begins again.
I think that's as good an answer as you're gonna get right now, Raquel. There's not quite 100% assurance. And there's no one that can really say what's going on in the world in the final analysis with COVID. So there's still some moving parts, but I appreciate your question, Raquel. It's on point, and it certainly reflects a lot of the sorts of questions that we're getting in the Gmail account. People are seeking those assurances very much, but the city is clearly hearing them, but they need to ensure they have some flexibility with decision making as well. So that's, I think, where things are landing for that. I want to actually take another chat box, Q&A box question that relates in the sense that it's looking at accountability and how funding and oversight works in these, not just decision-making processes, but quite literally the money. So in the sense of following the money, there was mention that federal funding does not quite cover 100%. Well, who does? How does it made up? And what are the fiscal oversight mechanism? Like, what is the way that the public can view into how money is managed in this? And I do think that's an Allison type of question, if I may presume. Allison, what's the fiscal oversight game? Where's the money coming from? It's a combination, you and Milton, but please kick it off.
I will pass it directly over to Milton. You probably thought he had a chance to have a sip of water, but he will be able to answer the funding discussions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks. I was smiling because I knew it was coming right to me. I also have Mariah, housing consultant, who works under the operations team. So in a nutshell, we have Toronto Shelter Standards, and this site would be no different. It would have to adhere to Toronto Shelter Standards, which is basically guiding principles of what is expected with the service provider in the delivery of services to the population. We get into a contractual agreement. In those agreements, there's appendixes indicating, what's expected in the sense of performance metrics. We met with the provider to ensure that they are adhering and providing the said outcomes as described. We also have our quality assurance unit that also goes out on sites to ensure that the programs are meeting Toronto Shelter Standards. I'm going to give a little bit more detail too, just to kind of help people understand. We also have a contracted agency that also looks at COVID IPAC practices to ensure that each site is following IPAC practices to ensure that if there is a outbreak or a case of someone having COVID, we're able to address appropriately and isolate as needed. But in the sense of funding, the key piece is that although we are going to be administering, the expectation is that the federal government will reimburse the cost of this program.
Great.
Marag, since you're on the call, did you want to kind of explain also how we ensure that the providers meeting expectations high level?
Hi there. At a very high level, I can say we do site visits. We do we would do documentation reviews of data that is entered in our shelter management information system. We review financial statements so that there's some sort of governance and organizational oversight. In terms of program delivery, it would probably mostly be through data analysis and site visits. And quite honestly, our knowledge of agencies such as Sojourn House. We've got a good long history of their program delivery. So it was a good solid understanding of how they approach program delivery. And we would work from that. Our QA team goes in and does a really solid assessment of I want to say the more sort of factual pieces that would indicate an agency was in compliance, such as the distance between beds, the number of toilets, that kind of thing. So we work together to assess and determine compliance with agencies.
Awesome. Thank you. I want to get to a really quick one on the Q&A from someone who says that they are a retired elementary school educator and they want to know how to volunteer around specifically the education needs, you know, tutoring, helping families transition into the Ontario school system. And I'm going to thank you for that comment. I'm just going to simply say, get in touch with us by email. So anyone who has a comment like that in the Q&A box, 3 Park Home Ave @gmail.com. So that's 3 Park Home Ave AVE @gmail.com. We'll flip that address up on the screen as well to help you write it down. But we're all ears, all offers of support. Something as valuable as helping children and a retired teacher is an awesome offer of assistance. So thank you for that. And I'd like to go to another person on the phone. If we could give the floor to Viola, Andrea, that would be great. So Viola, you are on live and you have the floor. Can you make a comment or ask a question?
Yes, hi, thank you for choosing me. I have 2 suggestions here. One suggestion is that I'm not too sure whether the speakers here are realized that the 5100 more complex that the Novotel connect to is actually has a under passageway to 4 condominiums at least. It is an under passageway at the lower floor, 5162, 5168, 5180 and 5200 Yonge Street. At least to those 4 condominiums, they're at the lower floor of that same complex that Novotel connect to. All of them connect to 5100 complex because of the subway entrance there. So there is a high probability that the people will be using that. So my suggestion is that since there has been security concern and there were even suggestions about having police and ambulances stationed outside there, will it be possible to just put a man guard at that under passageway? Because that under passageway already has room for that. It is right now the restroom. I don't mean the washroom. I mean the rest place room for the security guard of that complex building. So there is already facility there. So I'm wondering whether it may be possible to station a man guard at that under passageway to help out the local residents. That's the suggestion 1. Yeah.
Okay, can you make the second one really quick, Viola? We want to try to limit people to 1, but a quick add-on, if you may.
Yeah, and the second the second suggestion is just now the lady has mentioned that there is a financial support report, and she has referred all the financial questions to that financial report and urged us to search the website from the council. But there are tons of financial reports. So in order that people do not get to the wrong financial report, since this financial report is related to this website, can we include a shortcut, a link in this website to point to the correct financial report so that people are not talking about different things?
You're great. Thank you very much, Viola. That's going to happen. We're going to put links on the website that are clear, that direct you to the staff reports and the council items that provide that background. This engagement process is supposed to be transparent. It is your right as a citizen to know these things. And of course, the websites are difficult to navigate, and imagine putting a language barrier on top of that. So yes, we're going to put that on the website so that people, if they want to drill down and go deep, they can read those reports. That is your right as a citizen, and we'll make sure that's up there. On your first question, however, I want to say that we've addressed some of these issues in talking about the security. And there's an assumption sort of underneath that security guards are needed for perhaps controlling or minimizing the free movement of people in the shelter, which I don't believe is really the purpose of the shelters. So there is this balance with security, and I want to ask someone on the team to talk to it. Perhaps that's Suhal, but you know, stationing a permanent security guard in a public walkway area is you know, something that, like, there will be a holistic approach to the security, as the speakers have spoken to today. But you know, policing it in a perimeter kind of manner may not be appropriate, and that's also been talked about. Who wants to pick up on this?
Jane, it's Allison. Oh, yeah. Sorry, Jane. It's Allison. I will jump in. And I think on the first point, we've heard from both Suhal and Milton around sort of overall assessment about security needs. Fiona raises a very good point about the interconnection of the hotel into a larger facility that has different businesses and residences all attached. So I will say, as part of our security discussions, we have begun to engage with the current security provider for that larger complex, and we'll continue to have those discussions about not only what security is needed, but who is best to supply that security in order to ensure that it is seamless, because we do recognize that this isn't a discrete standalone site, that it is integrated, and our service providers need to be able to understand the integration of that.
Milton, did you want to add something on where was that Milton that was trying to get in there?
Yeah, so Suhal, I just wanted to add that security is very important for us for all of our sites, not just it's not specifically just for the community, but also for the residents within the site. We want to make sure that there's control access points, and then the site itself is secure for the individuals living in there, in case it's just to prevent any dangers to them as well. So our corporate security team has over the site, look for different avenues, including the interest individuals as mentioned. We know how we can close that access to it, but we will work with our operator partner to make sure that what the building is secure for everyone. I will pass it to Milton to talk about security in general, but I do want to just quickly highlight that I recognize that other people have raised concerns about needing police, ambulances, and other features. That doesn't necessarily mean that this site will need those features. Those are concerns from others based on their own experiences, based on what the challenges of maybe homelessness, addictions, mental health, but that doesn't necessarily mean that this site will be experiencing those services, or we would need those types of services at this site.
Okay, thank you.
Just going to add, Jane, that presumably the connection has existed for some time to the hotel, and has there been any problems with people staying at the hotel wandering those corridors and going places they shouldn't go? And if not, is there any reason to think that the refugees moving in are going to be more likely to do that than people staying in the hotel? I don't know the answer to that, but from what I've heard, there is not. So again, I don't want, every question deserves to be answered, but I don't want people to get the impression that because we're answering the question that we think there is a security problem.
All right. There's one question in the Q&A box that's actually deceptively simple. It's short, it's concise, and it simply asks, where do these people live now in Toronto? Which is actually kind of interesting. Do some of the people who will access these services currently live in Toronto? Is everyone sort of arriving from, an airport? But, I'd like to bring Dan back if I could, to sort of ask, like, how do people access these services, and are some of them on the streets or living in certain in homes or couch surfing, or how do they access these? How does that triaging process work? How do people get into this hotel?
So currently what's happening, the city of Toronto has some hotels, which is like a holding center. When people come in, particular families, they call family central intake, and family
central intake.
And so they are the ones who know where the beds are available, and they will try and accommodate refugees that are coming into the country, but they are really not getting the services that would help them to integrate very quickly that they will get otherwise from experienced provider. So they probably will be in a hotel, but just there temporarily to be moved into a place where they can be helped to do their immigration process and move on to. So central family intake is the one that knows where these people are. But I'll give you just example. In the month of July, middle of July to now, we've just done 18 intakes for families that have moved into our shelter. So as families move out, others move in very quickly. So just from, I think, the 15th to now, we've done about 18 families that have moved into our current shelter that takes care of families at 165 Grange.
Thank you. Let's go to Elisa, who has their hand up, and we can unmute Elisa and give them the floor. Elisa, can you say something?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep, perfect.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. This is more of a comment rather than a question. I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything that you're doing. This is the second meeting that I attend, and I see how you're working so hard and doing everything for the well-being of these people who are coming to Canada. I myself came here as a refugee as a result of a war in Ukraine, and though I know that this is not a shelter, not a place for Ukrainian refugees, but still I feel a lot of solidarity for any refugees who is coming from abroad. And it's just being homeless when you come to a country and you have nothing. It's just the most dehumanizing experience like I had in my life. We were very fortunate. We were, found a place to live very fast, but it's terrifying. It's really scary. It's very stressful. So the community will benefit so much if these people will have a nice place to stay, because then they will get relaxed and then they will, start to integrate in the society. Like really, you don't want to have these groups of people who are very stressed out, who are very scared, who are very lost. You want to provide them nice accommodation. So thank you so much for everything that you're doing. I'm very, very grateful to you. Thank you.
Elisa, if I could keep you on the phone just for a moment.
Sure.
To ask you about your experience, your journey through this, like how, what your advice would be, to the community to help make it any easier for people in positions such as you. You're saying that you're listening to this meeting and you're hearing a lot of some people who are pushing back, and you're seeing the city staff work really hard. What would be your advice to the community who may be fearful and just worried and have really good questions about what a difference it would make, and how they may try to embrace it in some way?
Really personal experience, I think, matters the most. So when you went through it yourself, then you really understand what it means to be a homeless refugee. So remembering that these are people, first of all, these are people. Yes, these are people who are coming with their problems. Of course, these are traumatized people. These are people who ran away from another country for whatever reasons, there is war or other reasons. So yes, these people are coming with their problems, but these are people who need help. And you never know what's going to happen to your country. Look what happened to my country. Look what happened to Ukraine. Did I imagine that there was going to be a war? So don't think that you are like living here in safety and this will never happen to you. People who I knew, people with great jobs, with great apartments, with cars, they lost everything, like in few days, and became homeless refugees. So think about it. When you help these people, you're also participating in the creation of the system that will guarantee the safety, your potential safety of your descendants in the future. Because the government, because all this, you amazing people who are doing that, you create this system that the whole society benefits from. So don't think about it as like these are people who are bringing us problems. These are people who are bringing us potential solution in the future for your own well-being and well-being of your descendants. So you never know what's going to happen in the future.
Elisa, thank you so much. You should note that there's people commenting in the chat that are just so happy to hear your perspective in this conversation. So it's really great to hear your voice here. People appreciate it.
Thank you so much
thank
you so much for giving me a space to talk. I really appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you for your work.
All right.
Can I say something?
Yes, Dan. Milton.
Yeah, no, thank you. And Elisa, thank you so much for that, sharing that with us. I know we've been referencing 5,800 young post it being a refugee shelter and when it became an emergency shelter system. But for those residents that lived in the area when 5,800 young was a refugee center, I think the experience was much different. You probably didn't even know what was happening there. And to look at numbers, I recall of the 200 people that were staying there, we only had 3 smokers. So again, it is the population that we serve, and based on the population is how we determine assessments and what programs to put in place to ensure the safety of those staying in our programs, but also for the community. So I just kind of wanted to go back in time. I know the pandemic has kind of blurred time for us, but I do think that when 5,800 was just a refugee program, you probably had a different experience.
All right. I want to note that there's only about 10 minutes left in the meeting. And I think there's a lot of questions that we've covered and answered. I'm going to give the floor to the last person we have here. Stephen, you are on the phone. You have the floor, and I believe you'll be the last live comment or question we'll take at this time. But can you have the floor, Stephen?
Thank you. Yep. Can you hear me?
Yep, absolutely.
Perfect. Yeah, I'd just like to echo the thanks. This is very informative. I've got a number of neighbors that can attend that I'm sort of representing right now. And I'll relay what the Coles notes of this meeting. It's good to know it's recorded, but it's really helpful to have this context and with
Stephen,
information.
You might want to apply for the CLC as a representative of a neighborhood.
Well, we'll have somebody, I think, who will be
great.
keen to do that. If not myself, somebody else. But information is helpful because in the absence of it, people make lots of assumptions. Councillor Filling referred to some of that with respect to fear, and it's a natural thing to happen. So I can appreciate it to a degree. But the center seems, the Novotel seems like an ideal spot, given what city staff have presented tonight. And mine is not so much a question as just information for the city staff, based on my experience talking to a number of residents. And what we've seen over the last few years is an immense amount of discussion around affordable housing, intensification, development, infill. We've got in our area, as you may be aware, this official city plan has the North York centers designated as a secondary plan and part of a very specific, I guess, if you will, policies around its development. So really the concern that a lot of people had with losing the Novotel as a commercial center is it seems like just another blow to the removal, the systematic and slow erosion of any commercial center that we might have. And so I just bring that up because I don't know if it will help or not, but I think when you hear some of the residents pushing back or what may appear to be NIMBYism or pushing back on things like this, part of it is context in the fact that there are people that have a sense of the city plan, that know what's supposed to be happening. And it seems like we're dismantling the commercial center in North York. This is just another example of it, but again, not to take away from what I would say, my humble opinion is it makes sense. So, you know, and I know lots of people will get behind it, but I just wanted to share that for what it's worth, if it helps.
Absolutely insightful. I wondered if, Counselor, do you want to reflect on anything? I mean, we're sort of in the last minutes of the meeting here. On what you've heard and the input and ongoing concerns and new issues. I think that we're, you know, ready to sort of wrap things up a little bit here because we've pretty much taken the questions and
Sure,
you know,
we've gone through we've covered all the questions, Jane?
Yeah, we've covered a lot, all of the topic areas. There's many questions, but there's a lot of overlapping ones. We could you know, take a couple of more, but in the interim, is there anything that you want to sort of reflect on as we get close to the end of the meeting?
Well, just the one thing is the importance of you know, communication, which Steve just talked about, because in the absence of proper information, people will make up their own, and that then takes on a life of its own, and things get distorted, and then that spreads, and you know, you have a lot of unfortunate situations then. So I think it's really important that we keep the communications flow going. I am limited in what I can send out after Sunday, so I'm planning to do one more newsletter, get it out tonight, right after this meeting, hopefully tonight or tomorrow morning. I will probably do a last one on Sunday, but after then I lose my ability to communicate as counselor. As those who get my newsletter know, my way around that is to communicate as an individual, which I can do as long as I don't use any city resources. So I'll be doing that. I do think we need to have more meetings, certainly one more before the facility opens, perhaps two more. And just not quite sure how to let people know about that other than, you know, doing the Canada Post mail drop. So I'm kind of open to suggestions on that, but I guess I would ask people who get my newsletter just to look for that link in it where they indicate that they want to keep hearing from me if indeed they do.
All right, that's definitely helpful. Now, I want to be clear that there are other questions in the chat, but we have answered them in a couple of different ways already. There's still people saying, is this going to turn into a homeless shelter? They're wondering, and we've gone at that question a couple of times in this meeting, and there will also be information about that on the project website. In terms of finding the project website, if we could go to the next slide, Andrea, that has next steps. This is the project website on the bottom line there that you want to access to find this information. People are, you know, they're also wondering, you know, about terms of the lease. Why 5 years? Why the Novotel? They're all excellent questions. I just know that we've addressed them in part or in great detail in the meeting, and I would direct you to the website and sending an email to us if you need more information. I also believe that, there's a lot of curiosity about how the shelter operations will work. Again, a shelter provider has not been signed on formally. So as soon as that happens, they will be available in any kind of community meeting context, but also potentially in stakeholder meetings. We'll know a lot more and be able to communicate more clearly around that. So there's still a lot of people curious and have questions, but we're developing answers to these questions. Keep them coming on Gmail. And I appreciate that you're engaging in this process. There's a lot to learn. And we're learning a lot by listening to your comments and what you're curious about as well. Thank you for your comments, Councillor Filion. Is there anyone from SSHA that would like to offer a final reflection on behalf of SSHA? Would that be Milton?
Sure.
I see your camera come on. All right.
Yeah. No problem. Yeah, no, I just wanted to echo those comments. And again, every time we come out to talk to the community, it's really important for us. And each time we get some feedback, we go back to our plan and revise it as needed. Hence the proposal. We revised it as a result of the last session. So please send us any emails to the email address there, and we look forward to our next session.
Thank you very much. The website, the Gmail, a meeting summary will be posted on the website. There was a lot of scrambling to get some answers to things between the last meeting on the 18th and now, but we will have both meeting summaries up in the ideal world by early next week, or certainly the first one and the second one to follow closely. That aggregates sort of areas of curiosity and inquiry and comments coming from you as the community, not only from the meeting speaking, but the Q&A and the email. So you'll get a sense from these reports what people are asking about, where the curiosity and hotspots are and where the answers are needed and provided. So I think that's all, unless anyone else wants to add anything. I think we just want to say thank you very much for coming and engaging. Stay engaged and consider joining the CLC or putting an application in when we get that process in place. We'll push it out through newsletters, of course. And I think we've just, been really happy to have so much interest in the service and great questions. So thank you very much. I think that's it. Unless anyone else. Thank you for participating. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Jane. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks, everybody.
Good night.